being a freelance photographer was quite easy. I mean, you don't really need anyone except yourself and a camera to start working and to start telling stories and making documentaries. Yeah, it was a much more flexible and much more easy approach to that world. And cinema was much more elitist and something where you depended on the team, where you depended on the people, or you depended on a higher budget.
Ja, genau wie die vergangene Folge, das Interview mit Nyani Kwame, so ist auch dies eine kleine Zeitreise, denn das Gespräch mit Mathias Depardon habe ich ebenfalls im Rahmen der Medientage des Fotofestivals Gacilly Baden Photo im August vergangenen Jahres, sprich 2022, aufgenommen. Es macht aber überhaupt nichts, denn es ist ein zeitloses Gespräch geworden. Die Inhalte, die haben nach wie vor Bestand. Wir fokussieren uns auf eines von Mathias' aktuellsten Projekten, Tales from the Land in Between. Es war auch in Baden zu sehen und in der Beschreibung heißt es: Der Garten Eden existiert und er ist in Gefahr. Er liegt im Irak, im Sumpfland auf dem Gebiet des antiken Mesopotamiens. Und er ist das letzte Überbleibsel der Reichtümer jener Region, die die antiken Kulturen der Sumerer und der Assyrer hervorgebracht hat. Das Gebiet am Zusammenfluss von Euphrat und Tigris, das größte Feuchtökosystem in Westeurasien, wurde 2016 in das UNESCO-Welterbe aufgenommen. Heute ist es von der Austrocknung bedroht. Ja, und genau mit diesem Konflikt des Wassermangels, der Wasserknappheit und die Auswirkung, die das Ganze hat, beschäftigt sich Mathias in seiner Serie. Es ist ein Roadmovie geworden, der den schleichenden Todeskampf in der Region und seiner Bewohner dokumentiert. Ein weiteres Thema ist Slow Journalism, also langsamer Journalismus. Was genau hinter dem Begriff steckt und wie ihn Mathias interpretiert, das erfährst du ebenfalls in diesem Interview. Am Anfang hörst du nochmal Mathias in einer kurzen Sequenz, wie er vor seinen Bildern direkt über sein Projekt spricht. Das Ganze wurde aufgenommen auf dem kleinen Rundgang, den wir mit Journalisten und den Fotografen zusammen gemacht haben. Und das, wie gesagt, jetzt noch kurz, bevor das eigentliche Interview beginnt. So, dann lass uns einsteigen. Viel Spaß mit dem Interview mit Mathias Depardon.
Alors là...
2020. Exposé en 2021 et Granty 2020. Je le rappelle comme ça pour la... Perhaps, but since everyone's coming this way...
You should go a few steps
further back
into the light.
Into the... You see?
For me, I do analog photography, so I need more
Please
light.
do.
Sorry. Yeah, this is...
Can we look somewhere in particular? I could sense this was the direction. What do you want me to do? I start? Okay. Hi.
Maybe you have to threaten them somehow. The water is rising or
So, okay. Glad you guys are still around after a couple of hours of touring around the exhibitions. My name is Mathias Depardon. I'm the grantee of the Yves Rocher grant of 2020. I've extensively, for almost 10 years, worked around the drying out of the Mesopotamian rivers, which are to be the Euphrates and the Tigris River. These are the two largest rivers in the Middle East, covering different countries such as Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Initially, my project started around a small town which no longer exists, called Asenkef. Asenkef was located on the banks of the Tigris River in the southeast of Turkey, and eventually flooded by a dam called the Ilisu Dam, which started to be in operation in 2020. I started to document Asenkef in 2012, 2011. And it was at a time where the Ilisu Dam was being built. Just to go back into a bit of history, basically Turkey in the 70s started the largest territory planning program that they've ever launched, called the GAP project. Among different agenda that the GAP project had, it was the domestication of water through these two rivers. and the building of 22 dams along these two rivers. Obviously, that has generated a lot of geopolitical tensions with neighboring countries such as Syria and Iraq, who are depending on the water. There are over 25 million people living along these rivers, and just to give you an idea, basically, since the Illisu Dam is being operated in 2020, that has reduced the flow of water by 30%. So among the images that you guys see, there are obviously a lot of images that were taken in Turkey. Asankeyf has been flooded in 2020. It was one of the only town or place or location that gathered by itself 9 out of the 10 criteria to be a UNESCO World Heritage site. Yet it was never enlisted by the Turks because they had this large territory planning program. And so along this project, I've basically studied how basically dams were also military strategy kind of set up. I've worked around the Mosul Dam. As some of you may know, the Mosul Dam is a very strategic dam. It was taken under the control of the Americans during the First and Second Gulf War. It was taken under the control of ISIS in the most recent years. Just to give you a sense, if you basically deliberately decide to blow up the dam, you could literally flood Baghdad within 3 days by 40%. And so this entire journey and story took me all the way down to the Iraqi marshes, which is all the way south of Iraq. This is Sumerian civilization. This is called initially the Garden of Eden. And this year there is major drought in the marshes. It's probably one of the last year where basically the marshes will exist. 2018 was the second largest drought since the 1930s. 2022, it seems almost to be the end of the Iraqi marshes. Again, the Iraqi marshes were a place where the Shia had found refuge under Saddam Hussein regime. And in the 90s, Saddam had decided to build dikes just to dry out the marshes and to force the Shia to escape. Today, since 2018, the marshes have become UNESCO World Heritage. And again, like I said, this year it's probably soon the end of the Iraqi marshes. The Iraqi marshes is a place where literally the two rivers get to meet. It's called the Shat El Arab. It's when the Tigris and the Euphrates get to meet together. And this literally exposes what may become a future war on waters. The Middle East will be threatened by these water tensions in the near future. There are already a lot of tensions between the Kurds in northern Iraq and Baghdad. There is tensions between the Iraqis and the Turks, as I said, but also with the Iranians who are building dams along with the Syrians. So I know we don't have that much more time, and I'm cutting out. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free and enjoy the show. Thank you.
Ja, und nach dieser kleinen Einführung hatte ich dann die Gelegenheit, mit Mathias noch ausführlich über sein Projekt und seine Fotografie im Allgemeinen zu sprechen. Viel Spaß!
Hello, Mathias.
Hello.
Thank you very much for taking the time. Yesterday, we were walking around here in Baden looking at all the exhibitions from the photographers and also came by your panels, your exhibition here in the park. What were your thoughts when you came by and saw your own work displayed that way on these big panels here outdoors in the park?
Well, it's always kind of satisfactory to get to see your own work being exhibited. I have to say that the same exact panels and the same exact exhibition was shown the previous year in Gacilly, because both festivals are in this partnership. So not that much of a surprise, but yeah, no, it's always good. I mean, the ideal is not really to get to see your work being exhibited, but it's more this ideal that you have this occasion and pretext to be able to speak about your work. I know my images quite well. I've probably seen them way too much by now, but so yeah, it's good to, you know, sensibilize people around a story that you've worked on for so many years, and I've worked around that project for 10 years, so I'm always happy to be able to share it with other photographers, journalists, also visitors of the festivals.
There's many ways you can share your work. Nowadays, it's mostly digital on social media. So it's very, very quick. You publish your photos online. And but this way, you mentioned in Gacilly, it's the same. It's an outdoor open air festival and a very unique way of displaying photos, not in a gallery setting where it's also like when you have printed work, they are up on the wall, but maybe then it's also a very reduced audience that go to galleries. Here, everybody it's out in the open. Somebody walking in the park, not maybe having anything to do with photography, they come by your photos and may stop and something sparks their interest.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, you get to reach a wider audience, and it's not automatically work that get to be seen within the industry, which is the case in a lot of time. I mean, I look at most of my colleagues who and myself we happen to produce photo books, and some photographers manage to really publish amazing photo books, but you tend to realize that, you know, it's we publish books to be seen and generally to sell to other photographers. So it gets to be quite a small industry, and we tend to almost be seen and do things that where the number one audience is our competitors and colleagues, editors, journalists, and so on. But so it's always nice to get to be part of these open exhibition, which generally reach a wider audience, people who are not automatically connected to documentary photography, and they get to be sensibilized to this kind of topics and this kind of stories and this kind of medium. So yeah, no, it's always good. It's always good to approach this kind of people.
You take pictures to show them to other people, to make some sort of impact, to tell a story, to communicate something. Brings us to the question: what was it initially that you that brought you to photography, or that made you choose that particular medium?
Well, I studied communication and then journalism. I realized I wasn't the most talented writer among my generation of students that I was part of. And you know, I was very inspired by cinema. I had a strong visual background. And I felt, you know, this was going to be my way of wanting to tell stories. You know, I mean, after studying journalism, obviously, I realized that I could become a storyteller. Photography could become the medium that I wanted to use to produce such things, such stories. There was obviously a sense of adventure, of traveling. I had, I think, gone through 12 different schools over 4 different countries as a young boy and a teenager. So I think I was kind of already suited to have this kind of instability, and traveling was kind of part of my DNA already. So I think it suited the person that I was at that time, and I think, yes, I think those are the reasons where most of the time, I mean, most young journalists and photographers start into this journey because they have a sense of adventure and they want to travel and learn languages and understand the world in some aspects. I think eventually we tend to do this job just to be closer to the people that we work with, and just be able to tell stories and tell other people's stories. I think that's kind of the main focus at the end.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that at an early age you started to travel widely. What was the reason for that?
Personal reasons, family reasons. I think, my family was, my parents were divorced from a young age. My dad started traveling. My mom started traveling on her own. So, I grew up in between the two. So initially that drove that kind of, instability. Mm-hmm. I made it a force, I think, at some point.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned cinema and movies. In what way was cinema an inspiration to you? What kind of movies?
I mean, my culture of cinema starts with the mute cinema of Charlie Chaplin, all the way to the Nouvelle Vague, Fellini, eventually to Tarantino, and American cinema of the 80s and 90s. So I think a lot of composition and light and photography was driven by that. I think at a young age I wanted to become a movie director. I had this ideal and fantasy of wanting to become a movie director, and but then I went on to studying journalism because it was kind of easier to access as well, journalism school than cinema school. Mm-hmm. And then from then, being a freelance photographer was quite easy. I mean, you don't really need anyone except yourself and a camera to start working and to start telling stories and making documentaries. So yeah, it was a much more flexible and much more easy approach to that world, and cinema was much more elitist and something where you depended on the team, where you depended on the people, or you depended on a higher budget. So this is how I got into photography and documentary.
Mm. Photography as a means to explore the world, to follow your sense of adventure, but then you also need something to direct your camera at. You need a subject, something to photograph. What was it that sparked your interest, especially in that region where you photographed extensively, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, in that area? What brought you there?
Well, initially, my first main project was around miners from Afghanistan, mostly, that were making their journey through Europe illegally, I suppose. So that was my first kind of story. Immigration was a topic that interested me. I felt connected somehow to that story, and so I worked, I would say, for 5 years around that first project. That led me from Calais to London to Greece and Turkey and Italy, and so that project got me to Turkey for the first time. This was prior documenting the Arab Spring in 2011. Then in 2011, I photographed the Arab Spring, like I just said, and yes, the year after that, I moved to Turkey. I based myself in Istanbul. And it was a new playground. It was a place I was kind of. It had been a few years where I was traveling and I was documenting events, natural catastrophe, and events in India. Next month I was in Haiti, and the month after I was doing the Arab Spring, and it was just too much. I was just like, I felt kind of unfocused and trying to do too many stories and document too many fronts, and so. I wanted to be more focused and work on long term and long form and what we could call slow journalism. So I decided to move to Turkey and to that eventually led me to starting this, what was initially this personal project on the Mesopotamian rivers, on the Tigris and Euphrates, on the Kurdish region. I did stories on the PKK, I did other stories, but my main focus around the Kurds was more about trying to do this environmental piece and trying to understand how cultural assimilation was going on, and, trying to see how the Turkish government was trying to change this region, geographically speaking, but also through major development, such as the construction of dams and, building new cities. And so, my focus got taken into this story. And initially I was just photographing this small town who was going to eventually be flooded by this dam, called the Elysee Dam. And it took 8 years eventually. Eventually I was never able to be there when the city was flooded. But I started documenting this city in 2012. And from that tiny village located on the banks of the Tigris, I ended up documenting an entire region first, and then I started documenting northern Iraq and then southern Iraq, because all these places are connected by the same rivers. So it became a regional story, regional project. Like I said, there's over 25 million people living along these rivers. Water, I understood how water was like also this very geopolitical theme, and how the domestication of water by Ankara and by Turkey was leading to a lot of tensions. Not only that, there's also tensions among Iraqis and among Kurds around this idea of water. But it's a very sensitive topic, and being a 40-plus-year-old photographer, environment is and climate change is obviously among these topics that are important in 2022. And after having photographed different social stories, after having done a bit of frontline and after having done different things, I got more connected to this kind of Anthropocene and approach and environmental stories.
Very fascinating that it initially started with this project about the town that got flooded because they were building a dam there, and that led to discovering a whole region through that lens and following the consequences and the ripple down effects, and it has so many facets. Geopolitically, it's very important, and you can tell so many stories along this river that you then followed. What's to be seen here tells tales from the land in between. You're telling a story about the Mesopotamian area where the swath are a region with a huge history going back into human history. Can you tell a little bit more about that particular part of this long-term project and what's in what ways it's in danger?
So so Southeast Turkey is more. So Asenkef is a city that was built prior to the 12th century. They have one of the first bridge that crosses the Tigris River. That bridge was from the 12th century because it's no longer there. And it's mostly Assyrian and Roman and Ottoman culture who was in this region back in the days. It's a place that live out of fishery and agriculture, and they have on top of Asenkef there's this place called, there's a citadel, there's a castle, and apparently you had this king who was in the south of in that location, living in that castle, and they made a prisoner, and the name of the prisoner was Hassan, and Hassan had a white horse apparently, And as he's in the courtyard of the castle, he's about to be executed. And Hassan is asking for a last wish prior to his death, which is to ride his horse. And so this last favor is given to him, and he's able to ride his horse, and he's eventually going up his horse, and he's going to jump over the fence of the castle and literally make a 200 feet dive into the tigers. And he's going to survive. And people are going to be Hassan, how did you do that? And so that's how initially Hassan Cave became Hassan Cave. It's a very large region. So yes, Mesopotamia by itself used to be what's been called the Garden of Eden. It's where writing, irrigation took birth initially. It's south of Iraq is Sumerian civilization, so it's one of the oldest civilization on Earth. You have next to it the city of Basra. Basra was the Venice of the Middle East for a very long time. So water is is very present into the culture of these people. Today, the marshes are in a high risk of disappearing. During the 90s, the Shia community eventually took refuge in the marshes and hid it from the Ba'ath Party and from Saddam Hussein. Saddam decided to build dikes to dry out the marshes, and so the Shia rebellion would eventually escape or get caught. So Saddam was the first one to initially and intentionally dry the marshlands. At the fall of Saddam, they've destroyed the dikes and gave birth to the wetlands again. In 2017, the marshes were named UNESCO World Heritage and was trying to be protected. But like I said previously, it's water's been very badly mismanaged in Iraq in the last 20, 30 years. Not only Turkey, but Iran has also built several dams to prevent the water from going to Iraq and to try to keep the water. And then there's internal tensions between the Kurds and Baghdad also regarding water. So the marshes being located all the way south of Iraq, the water doesn't reach anymore. And so it's an entire civilization almost, or not civilization, it's an entire part of the history of Iraq who may disappear very soon. And obviously water will be a major source of tension in the coming years in this specific region. And not only the Middle East and not only Iraq will be touched by that.
Threatened from so many sides. You said that like coming down from Turkey with building all the dams and Turkey using it as a geopolitical weapon as well to control the flow of the water.
Yeah, the dams have always been a source of controlling the water. We've seen it during the First and Second Gulf War. The Americans took access to the Mosul Dam. Recently, ISIS was in control of the Mosul Dam. I mean, they all know how strategic it can be. Same thing happened in Syria. I mean, you cut the water from the people, and you'll generate a flow of people literally moving and going away. I mean, if you cut the water from an entire town, people will move out. So it's a very quick way to kind of gain territory within a conflict. And also you can literally pretext of you can claim you're going to destroy the dam and eventually flood an entire region. So yeah, water is a weapon of war as well.
Yeah.
And I've tried to also document that indirectly through this project.
Tell us a little bit about the civilization or the culture of the people living there. What is it? What they do there in the marshes?
Well, what they do in the marshes, what they did in the marshes centuries ago, and what they do today is basically the same thing. The marshes, they live out of fishing, buffalo breeding, and mostly those are the two main activities. So today the fishing has been reduced to almost non-existent. There's almost no more fishing, and the buffalo are dying because there's no source of water. So those two main activities, which there's also agriculture, obviously, through palm tree and dates, but this is also drying out. And due to the fact that there's been so much drought today, there's over 50% of all lands in Iraq and in southern Iraq that have been affected by salinization. So agricultures and landowners are losing their growth. There's no more agriculture, and so basically it's an entire region who's dying. Fishermen and agriculture are trying to move up north to buy new lands if they can afford to, or find other places to fish where salt water hasn't affected their fishing activities. So that's basically it. And it's I think we were talking to some scientists last time I was in Basora, and I think the water in the Shat El Arab in Basora is over 150% more salty than it used to be 10 years ago. So yeah, it's proper climate change, mismanagement of water that is affecting an entire region today.
Yeah, very complex. And how do you go about it photographically when you go out there trying to document it? How do you find the images that you need to tell the stories?
I think it's along some sort of expertise that you start building throughout the years. You start understanding what are the images that you need. That doesn't stop you from taking images that you don't need, but that are also important within a story. Some images are more informative, some images are more intimate, some images don't reveal eventually anything, but they don't reveal a certain type of information, but they reveal a certain emotion or a certain feeling. So I don't go out there and I don't have a storyboard in my mind, and I'm not like, okay, this is the images that I need to be telling the story. I mean, the more you get into a story and the more you get to know a region and the more you get to be interested by seeing these things and these things, and at the end, it's a mix between your journalistic approach and your own sensibility and what attracts you. What are the scenes that you want to see? I was telling earlier that for the last 10 years, I've mostly worked, or at least within this project, I've mostly worked with medium format analog camera. So that also gives you a certain distance to your subject and to the landscape that you may photograph, and that helps build up a story within the long term, within the time that you take to do it. So I mean, I don't think there are formulas within this job. There are things you can do. It never really goes. I mean, you know what you are to do. Generally, you need to spend the right amount of time. You need to spend the most time you can possibly spend on a story to get the right access, to make so the people don't even kind of notice you, and so that you're part of the people in some extent. I think it's at the end of the day, sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes but at the end you go back to your screen and you look at your images, and normally you know what's missing if something is missing still.
Yeah. What are the challenges working in that region? Do you go there alone? Do you, like, over the years, I imagine you have built up a network of people facilitating you with access to certain areas, or what does it look like on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, these are what we call sensitive areas. It's kind of the same thing. You need to be surrounded by the right people, have the right fixer. Eventually, you don't need a fixer anymore. The fixer becomes a friend, and then, I mean, he's still your fixer at the end of the day, but you manage to establish different contacts and get to know different people. I think the ideal is kind of to surround yourself a little bit, to know who you're with, and there's a sense of ground journalism. I mean, when you did several stories, you tend to, but you never know. I mean, you never know. I worked in the same region for over 6 years, in the southeast of Turkey, and then eventually got arrested, and eventually got put in prison, and eventually got deported out of the country. I never expected that this would happen to me in a place that I knew so well. Mm-hmm. So you never know. Things can happen. You need to be kind of ready that things can, escalate, and I think it's part of what we do. Like right now I was working in India on a story on sand and on illegal sand extraction. It was edgy. It was complicated. I wasn't invited there. No one wanted photograph to be taken. But I mean, this is kind of what we do. I mean, we tend to put ourselves in this kind of situation. We need to, sometimes to have the access and to reveal the information. We need to put ourselves in this kind of situation. It's, you need to have a bit of a, you need to want to push it, but not only. I mean, not all stories need that. Not all stories demand that. I mean, some stories are extremely safe, and you just need to find the intimacy with the people you photograph, and that's enough. And so, it depends on the topics that you photograph and the stories that you're trying to tell. Some stories are more edgy than others. Axes are more complex, but at the end of the day, we all have the same kind of approach, I think.
Yeah. How did that come about, your arrest in Turkey?
To be honest with you, I've spoken way too many times about this event. There's not much I can say, really. I mean, it's like I'm not the first and I'm not the last journalist who'll be arrested. It was an experience. I think the deportation was more complex than to deal with than my time in prison, because I had been living in Turkey for 5-6 years. So to be able to live a country that you've lived for so many years in that way, it's an experience. And you kind of have to rebuild. Most of my clients, most of the people I worked for knew me for being a photographer based in Turkey. The day I was deported, the phone wasn't ringing. No one was really asking whether I could shoot a story in Turkey anymore. So, yeah, you need to rebuild. Most of my activities was in this region for 5-6 years. And, eventually I found other places. I kept on shooting the same story I was shooting in Turkey, but then I started photographing it in Iraq, which was lucky for me. I was at that stage where I was about to photograph that country for the same reasons. So yeah, we need to be flexible anyways. I mean, and this is what we do.
Yeah. So for the time being, you're not able to return to Turkey?
For the time being, yes. I don't know for how long. We'll see. We'll figure this out. It's been 5 years. Normally, a deportation is you're banned of a country after not living in it for 5 years. You're allowed to go back into a country after 5 years post deportation. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to be able to go back to Turkey one day. I hope I will, and I think I will. So yeah, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And your work on this project in Iraq, is that for right now? Is it have you stopped working on that, or is it still an ongoing project?
It's still an ongoing project. I haven't. I'm hoping to continue. I'd love to go to Syria a little bit and photograph the Euphrates there and some of the dams located in Syria, so I can have this feeling of completing the story a little bit more. I may go back to the south of Iraq as well one more time. I'd like to go back at least one or more time. So it's ongoing. It's ongoing. At the same time, I've jumped into this other project now, and so it's kind of, I find it quite healthy to have different projects at the same time. It allows you to step back a little bit from a story and to take a bit of distance with it and to focus yourself on something else for a while and to come back to it eventually with another take and another vision of it. So it's good. I'd rather do that than being stuck in a very monomaniac way to one single project at a time. Mm-hmm. I find it more healthy, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to jump back into the Mesopotamian rivers and into this region again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mathias. It's been very interesting to talk with you about your project and your approach to slow journalism. I find that a great approach to take your time to really dive into a subject, trying to understand it well. I think the world needs that, experts, and not just the flashlights and the headlines. So keep on doing what you're doing, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Ja, das war ein weiterer Ausflug nach Baden zu Europas größtem Open-Air-Foto-Festival. Das findet in diesem Jahr auch wieder statt, vom 15. Juni bis zum 15. Oktober. Also es lohnt sich da, vor den Toren Wiens vorbeizuschauen. Wenn du mehr erfahren möchtest, dann geh gerne auch mal im Gate 7 Archiv zurück. Da findest du jede Menge Folgen und Interviews rund um dieses Festival. Vielen Dank und bis zum nächsten Mal. Dein Kai.